Hello and welcome to the Moonshots podcast. It's episode 263. I'm your co-host, Mike Parsons, and as always, I'm joined by the man himself, Mr. Mark Pearson Freeland. Good morning, Mark.
Hey, good morning, Mike. Good morning, listeners. Good morning, members, subscribers, viewers, everybody who's out there who's part of the Moonshots family. Thank you for tuning in on what is bound to be an incredibly exciting kickoff, Mike, for our brand new series on creativity.
Yes, I'm ready to rock and roll, Mark.
Oh, you know who else is ready to rock and roll? That's right. It's the subject and topic of today's episode. That is the legend, the renowned music producer himself, Mr. Rick Rubin. Now, Mike, I know we're probably going to touch upon him a little bit during this episode. We're probably going to reference some of his accolades, some of his impressive behaviors around creativity. But I just want to name drop a few people that I know that he's worked with. They are people, small fry like the Beastie Boys, or Run DMC, Red Hot Chili Peppers, Johnny Cash, Metallica, maybe Kanye West, Adele, oh yeah, and Jay-Z, Eminem, Tom Petty, Black Sabbath. You get the idea. It's a lot of impressive people from a lot of different musical genres and verticals. And I think, Mike, that's what attracted you and I, as well as the Moonshots members, I think, towards getting into somebody as unique and creative as Rick Rubin, right? He's managed to penetrate a number of different musical genres and still be able to have almost a record-breaking volume of Grammy nominations and musical accolades to his name.
Yeah, it's so true, man. Like, this guy can play any genre, he can play any game and deliver the goods. But I think even more importantly than that, I don't remember a book on creativity that so clearly outlines a methodology that you can follow, super down to earth, super relatable, super doable, and can really give you a framework to produce truly great creative work. I think that's what we have in his new book, The Creative Act. So if you're thinking to yourself, how do I stay the course? How do I actually get a project from A to Z that has a lot of creativity requirements? This show, this book is for you.
What a setup, Mike. You know what? I don't think there's anybody or anything that you and I could do at this point better than handing over to himself, Mr. Rick Rubin himself, that is, to help introduce us and kick off today's show. So without any more further ado, why don't we hear, Mike, from Rick Rubin? He's going to be talking to Andrew Huberman about his creative process and how we should all start by holding things lightly.
When I engage in a particular project, whatever it is, I dedicate all of myself for that period of time, whatever it is, whether it be 20 minutes or whether it be 5 hours, whatever it is. Total focus and no outside distraction whatsoever. And when I leave that process, I do my best not to think about it when I'm away from it. I don't bring any materials with me. I don't leave the studio with works in progress and spend time listening to them during the day or looking for ideas. I stay as far away from it when I'm not directly engaging in it as possible. And in the best of situations, I have something else to totally engage myself in between. So instead of working on project A for 5 hours and then leaving and doing nothing, I'm hoping to engage in a project B or B, C, and D with all of myself before going back to project A again, which might be the next day, let's say.
So this relates to an amazing chapter and series of writings in your book that I'm not going to describe because I want people to find it for themselves about disengaging from the process. One question I had as I read that chapter, and as you're saying this now, is even though you're disengaged, do you believe that your subconscious is working it through?
I believe so. And I think in general, to stew over a problem is not the way to solve a problem. I think to hold the problems lightly.
This is really interesting, Mark, because in one way you might argue that those two ideas somewhat clash. He's saying go all in, which has an intense heaviness to it, and then hold them lightly. I think it's like packaging in discrete boxes, right?
Mhm.
You go in, you go really deep. Like I get the feeling when I hear him in this, like if you tried knocking on his studio door while he's in the deep mode, I think like World War III,
Yeah,
right?
I think you're probably right.
So what a great parallel to what we learned
Mm.
from Cal Newport on his book Deep Work. But I get
Mm.
the feeling Rick goes all in, and because he does this, he can say, "Look, I'm all spent on problem A for now. I've gone deep for several hours. I can close up the box and I can put it away." And then I'm not like constantly like trying to multitask it. I can move on to
Mm.
something else. And because I have a deliberate practice, I'm not worried about meeting deadlines because I've allocated the time. So
Mm.
then he can go to something else. And this works with another idea that we've found quite a lot, which is, we often use the analogy, if you're giving a speech in 3 or 4 weeks from now, start by writing down your first few ideas and then say, in a couple of days, I'm going to come back and go deeper.
Mm.
And then let the subconscious start working its way through it. There's somehow a very deep sense of preparation and readiness that you have when you can allocate the deep work over days and weeks. And I think our greatest enemy here is trying to multitask and never actually going deep. And that's why I think we kind of hold creative ideas heavily, because we never reached that satiation, that satisfaction from a 3-hour deep dive on a problem. And so as a result, we're kind of still doing that ad hoc throughout the day over several days rather than the deep stuff. And just the last round out on this, Mark, is this just not the modern manifestation of what Einstein did? Is he just thought about one problem incredibly deliberately, consecutively, until he got somewhere with it. And he quite openly said, I think the only difference between me and everybody else is I just focused on the one thing for longer. Right?
Yeah.
He actually said, I'm no smarter. I just focused more. And I think Rick's giving us a hint on how to focus, right?
Yeah, I think, look, your summation, Mike, is totally spot on in my mind. I love the call out that you had there around this friction, knowing that you're going deep in something and then you can step away. You don't have that anxiety where maybe subconsciously or consciously, there's something else I need to do. But you're totally right. Einstein, creative genius in his own way. Yes, in science and math, but specifically a creative himself, entrepreneur to a certain extent. You're right. He was able to probably do these deep dives that Rick's calling out, have a real hard focus on project A, and then leave it. Give yourself breathing space. Go and find something else. And that, I think, is a big call out. And that's where I can see a project B being something like family, being something like maybe another project you're doing for work, or maybe it's a personal entrepreneurial building block or studying even, or maybe it's exercise. Maybe you're just trying to get a little bit healthier. It's a really interesting call out from Rick, where he's basically trying a little bit like Cal, as you specified. He's blocking his days. He's doing focused work on project A during his work time, and then he's doing those other projects in the rest of the time to ensure that he is the best version he can be when he comes back to project A, right?
Yes. And I would just give you this as a summation. Imagine if we could spend just 2 hours a day, 5 days a week on our biggest priority, totally uninterrupted, doing deep, deep work. Imagine how much progress you make in a week or a month. I mean, that's progress. I mean, the only other thing you could do once a month, I think, is become a member of the Moonshots podcast, right?
You know what? I think you're totally right, Mike. And one of the things that really stands out to me is not only it being a kind of monthly dedication to the Moonshots family via a little thing called Patreon, but also it enables you to get the good time feels, but also get your name called out every single week in the Moonshots weekly show, as well as the Moonshots Master Series. So please welcome in those lucky and loved individuals, including Bob, Niles, I Tripped and Dietmar, Marjan Connor, Lisa, Sid, Mr. Bonjour, Paul, Berg, and Kalman. Joe, Christian, Samuela, and Barbara, Deborah, Lasse, Steve, and Craig, Ravi, Yvette, Raul, Nikawada, Ingram, Dirk, Venkata, and Marco. Jet, Roger, Steph, Raw, Nimalen, Diana, Christoph, Denise, Laura, Smitty, Corey, Daniela, Mike, and Antonio are legends who have been with us over a year, as well as Zachary, Austin, Fred and Ola, Andy, Diana, Margie, Ron, Jasper, Fabian, and our latest addition into the Moonshots members family, Gu Hong. Thank you guys so much all for joining us day in, day out, week in, week out on the Moonshots show.
And big tip of the hat, and thanks to all of you who are members. If you'd like to become a member, head over to moonshots.io. That's where all the goodness lays. You get your own podcast, the Moonshots Master Series, and frankly, you get to spend some more time with Mark and I. What more could you want in life? Well, I can answer this question. I think you'd want to think about the creative process. Mark, I would even go as far as saying you might want to seed your creative thinking.
Well, you know what? I think that's going to be the perfect segue, Mike, into our next clip of this show, because one of the key steps within Rick Rubin's book, The Creative Way, is a phasing of creative work and effort. And that one, like you just said, is a little bit about seeds. Let's hear from Doug Neal from Verbal to Visual. Break this down for us in a little bit more detail.
While Rubin does not encourage you to stick to a rigid creative process, he does outline for us 4 broad stages of the creative process. In the first phase of the creative project, you gather seeds. You go out and look for what might be the interesting starting points for whatever piece of work that you've decided you'd like to make. You collect these seeds. And for this beginning phase of the creative process, it is important to not compare, but simply gather. As the seeds arrive, forming conclusions about their value or fate can get in the way of their natural potential. We don't want to form conclusions about what these seeds might turn into too early on in the process, because that can get in the way of their natural potential. So here your work is to collect seeds, plant them, water them with attention, and see if they take root. When I'm reading a book with plans of creating a visual summary of it, the seed collection stage looks like underlining interesting passages as I read. And then for this book, I decided to use sticky notes to do some quick sketches, take some quick notes, one of these per chapter of the book, because they're so short and punchy. So these are the seeds that I gathered, some of which decided to take root and became incorporated into the visual summary that I'm starting to sketch out here. In writing a book, collecting seeds is deciding on some of the main ideas I want to share, the stories I'd like to tell, the research studies I'd like to reference, gathering those individual pieces without yet worrying about how exactly they'll all fit together.
So I think that the catch here, Mark, is when we do gather the inspiration for a new project, I think we can rush to judging, right? Oh, that's the way to do it. For sure, that's the one. And again, it's this battle with time and focus and what you put your attention on. It's almost everything is conspiring against us to take our time and just gather, right? One of the things I like to do if I'm working on a visually creative project is to scan Pinterest and create a board for something. That's my gathering seeds. So I'm interested to know, Mark, how do you try and make this happen, the gathering of seeds?
Look, Mike, I've been pretty guilty in the past, and in fact, you probably remember when we collaborate, I do tend to jump into logistics pretty quick. And something that I, through working and partnering with a lot of people in the past, I'll try nowadays to be a lot slower rather than trying to jump into action stations. And I think that the trick for me has been providing more breathing space into the ideas being shared and creating a bit more of an environment where myself and other people around me, maybe teammates and so on, can ask questions, maybe answer questions to each other, or share the initial concepts with a broader team and seeing what sticks. So really, for me, being curious in this early stage. For some people, they won't want to share those ideas with others. That's okay too. You can just write it up, stick it around your house, and whatever sticks as we were just hearing from Doug, and lays a seed or a root, then you can come back to and you give yourself that permission to explore and be curious with those ideas, rather than, exactly as we heard, jumping straight into action stations, which I think can be a little bit subjective, can't it?
Yeah, it really can. But the thing I notice about when you do create a Pinterest board, or whether you create a mood board behind you in the office, is you are bound to draw more meaningful conclusions and insights about what could be if you've gone through that process over a period of time. Like, the thing that I really witness, which really is hard with creativity, is when you're like, hey, I need to basically brief the design today, and I've only just started thinking about it today. Invariably, you will go to the easiest, most obvious idea as opposed to the best idea. Because you're so like, oh my God, I got to deliver this brief by the end of the day, that there's no contemplation, no rumination. Yeah. You're like, let's just ship it, let's get it out. And, you're only going to get mediocre work or just unsurprising and not very unique work, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's the low-hanging fruit. What can we get out so that we stop getting bothered by our manager or some other team who wants us to do something? You're right. Instead of doing something that feels a little bit of a disservice to their time as well as your own, spend more time, do it properly, really allow that creative muscle to stretch, maybe with others.
Yes, and because we defer too much jumping to conclusions, because we defer too much of that rush that we often get ourselves into, that's the way. By allowing that seeding process, that contemplation, being open to possibilities, what I think is interesting is, arguably, do you think this next stage, the experimentation, do you think this could be the peak of the Rick Rubin process? What do you think, Matt?
Well, it's true. If the first stage is all about gathering and figuring out where something's going to take root, this next stage, which we're going to hear from Doug again, definitely continues that thread and that process. But before I commit, Mike, to whether or not I think it's important or more important, let's actually hear from Doug himself, break it down for us in a little bit more.
The second phase of the creative process is experimentation. In the experimentation phase, you start to see where these seeds might go. You explore different directions. You let them make their own way toward the sun, move in the direction that they would like to go, as opposed to being overly controlling. You want to let them develop in their own way at this stage of the process. As Rubin says, allow the seed to follow its own path toward the sun. And as you observe that path, pay attention to what you get excited to. So there's an encouragement here to follow your excitement. Rubin says, often the most accurate signposts are emotional, not intellectual. Excitement tends to be the best barometer for selecting which seeds to focus on. But in that selection process, don't narrow your options too soon. Rubin tells us to first try everything. Don't be afraid to explore paths that you might not initially see potential in, because you could be surprised. And even if a given direction doesn't work out, you can take solace in the fact that, quote, every unsuccessful solution gets you closer to the one that works. So in the experimentation phase, you're trying everything and you're paying particular attention to what gets you excited.
I like this, Mark, because I think the emphasis, once again, is pursuing paths that you might even be a bit skeptical, but being open to let it go its natural path. Because at worst case scenario, at least you know what doesn't work, right?
Yes, exactly. That's right.
Now, the thing is, though, by just naturally following the paths and seeing what works, one of the other things that I find that happens is that even though you went down Route 4, and it didn't quite feel right, there was one thing you discovered that did work really nicely, and you take that and put that into idea 2, and then you combine ideas 1 and 2, and you get some unique thing, and all of a sudden you've got a hit on your hands, right? It's the ability just to follow those natural paths and don't close it out. I think what I notice is particularly people feel the need to say, oh, that won't work, or this is the way to do it.
Yeah.
What you almost feel like Rick's saying is just suspend those judgments, just go down the natural paths. And if you just do enough iterations, emotional patterns, I'm always drawn, like, for example, if I was looking at 3 different art directions, if you're always seem to be drawn to a direction as you're developing all 3, at some point it's good to ask, why am I so drawn to this? What is it that feels really good? And at some point, you will feel confident that it is just so much better than routes 2 and 3. But you have to let that happen as opposed to trying to judge that with insufficient creative stimulus. I think this is how it plays out. What do you think, Mark?
Yeah, I think you're totally right. I think particularly with a genre like music, an industry like music, where it's a very emotional process, you're trying to communicate an idea or a feeling. I think it's very easy, I would imagine, for artists to bin anything that they create and think, no, this isn't it. And it's like like Doug was calling out for us then, it's that intelligence rather than emotion. Emotion rather than intelligence.
Yes.
And I think you're right. If we all take that beat and think, this isn't quite right, but what I do like here is this bit of an idea, this product, going back to Sarah Blakely when she was founding Spanx, she knew that selling fax machines wasn't part of the movie that she wanted to be in. But what she did know is that she quite liked sales. So she wrote it down and came back to it later. I think rather than throwing the baby out with the bathwater and instead spending time to not only consider what you like in life, but also what you might enjoy in your projects, in the art that you're creating, in the work that you're producing, spend that time to see what sticks and kind of the things that, probably make you smile when you're doing them. For me, when I'm doing quite a difficult or intense project and I catch myself, circling a few words that I keep on coming back to, or things that I really want to communicate to a client or a partner, those are the things that I realize, that's kind of the thing that's getting me up in the morning. That's giving me that little bit of passion to continue going on this process and exploring it further. So you're right, finding those little breadcrumbs is the secret, I think, to continuing a joyful exploration of the work that's at hand.
Yeah, so I would, if I think about practical ways I get this done, is, I love to have a couple of mock-ups of an idea, a couple of prototypes of an idea, and I start to use those with other people to gauge their feedback. Just for example, I was working on the launch of a new television channel earlier this week. And this great brand expert that I'm working with showed me 3 directions. And we did exactly this. We did the experimentation and we asked ourselves, like, what did we think of this? Then we brought some other people into the process. And we basically had 3 treatments of 3 very different brands. And it was really good to see the expressions and to hear the rationale behind it. So we didn't just have one design and say, oh, that works. We deliberately pursued 3. In fact, the brand specialist was saying to me, oh, listen, I really liked one, but I still kept doing the other 2. And it was really good because what I could see he was doing with me is like, hey, so this is how I'm feeling. How are you feeling? And I think if you want to see a natural path, that creating a prototype, comparing and discussing it's how you get the experimentation feedback. Because any experiment is truly about, I do this and what happens, right? I create this. How do I feel? How do others feel? What does this evoke? And I think if you want to go out and experiment, just think of have a prototype and to get people to give you feedback on this prototype.
Yeah, I love that. I remember working with an art director many years ago who we were doing a rebrand of a business in Europe, and he found a route that he really, really loved and said, no, this is it. This is the only way they can do it. And the client would say, no, let's see a couple of others. And, the team would all say, come on, mate, let's explore maybe 1 or maybe 2 more. And he said, all right. So he started exploring a couple of different routes, in Rick's language, maybe Project B, Project C. And eventually over time, he realized, actually, I was incorrect with my first recommendation because it doesn't work in the long run. When I actually explored the other areas, that's when I realized, oh no, this is it. And now I prefer these ones. So maybe another trick, Mike, is to have to force yourself into creating more than one thing, much like your brand specialist is doing, in order to quality assure some of the other work that you're doing alongside it. It's kind of fun. Keeps the creative journey going, doesn't it?
Yeah. And if, particularly at the beginning, if you've really explored a lot of different approaches, you get this sort of this magpie effect that I talk about. Like you still, even though we didn't go down route 4, we can take one of the techniques that they used or one of the ideas and put that in here and remix that. I think that's where you start to get those combinations which lead to like new exciting formats that they're a bit outside of what we might expect. Now,
the magpie.
Now, some of this that we're talking about touches upon the work of many people that we've covered in the past. I mean, I'm thinking about Walt Disney. I'm thinking about Elizabeth Gilbert, John Cleese. These are all great creative folks that we've studied in the past. And Mark, look, if people are really getting their creative juices going listening to this episode, obviously there is a destination you can go to where you can get the whole back catalogue.
We can get all 263 episodes of the Moonshot Show by navigating over to www.moonshots.io. You can get transcriptions for every single episode. You can see the upcoming shows that we have planned. And you can even click on a little button up at the top and become one of those highly valued members that you heard of earlier in the show. But Mike, in addition to that, all of our listeners can go and check us out on all of the podcast platforms as well as places like YouTube. We want to spread this idea of learning out loud. So as many people who can join us as possible, please do so.
Yes. And if that's got you feeling crafty, then we've got the perfect clip for you because the Rick Rubin adventure continues, Mark.
Yeah, it does. The Rick Rubin Adventure Show is here upon us with another clip now, Mike. This one, again, coming from Doug, is going to help us understand this phrase that we're going to hear a little bit about, this idea of a winding staircase. Oh, that sounds challenging already, Mike. I don't know whether I want to fight or flight for that. So let's hear from Doug helping us helping us think about refining idea now that you've got through the seed and the experimentation and into the next stage, which is all about execution and crafting.
This is when you bring in a bit of focus and you start working your way up what Rubin calls this winding staircase, where instead of experimenting with a bunch of different directions, you focus on a steady climb upward. As he says, look away from the open field and turn toward a winding staircase 100 stories tall. That probably sounds a little bit daunting. That's quite a long way to walk up. But what's interesting about this stage compared to the previous two is here is when you bring more of yourself into the work. Rubin suggests that in these first two, you let the ideas guide the way. This is when you bring in your personality, your taste, your perspective, which, when combined with the let's call it natural potential of that particular seed, I think makes it easier to do this steady climb upward. So within my work, in this experimentation stage, I am focused on what excites me about the ideas that I'm reading or the potential things to include in the book that I'm working on. But then it's not until the crafting stage when I start to actually bring my full self into the process to perhaps share some of the personal stories related to the ideas that stand out to me, in the case of making a visual summary like this, and the same with the book. When you move from an outline to actual writing, it's not just about the ideas and stories that you decide to tell, but how I choose to weave them together in my own voice. In this crafting stage, momentum is important. So Rubin encourages us to not rush, but do work quickly.
Yeah. I like this. So this is that shaping, right? And you can almost feel like we just did a bit of a pivot from divergent thinking to convergent thinking. It's sort of like now you need to make your choices about the avenues or the staircases that you want to climb, to use a Rick Rubin metaphor. Now, I think the important thing here if I was to use writing a book analogy, if you've got your book outline, you roughly know, look, I want to do 12 chapters. Each chapter has 2 main parts. I think you want to kind of get into the rhythm of writing those, because once you get this crafting stage going, you want to the tempo that I sense is it's almost like the playing field, you know how to score the points. You just want to play now, right? You've done your preseason training, you want to get into it. You've made your choices. This is how you go. So I think this is where you really want to have a daily practice. What I find is chipping away at creative projects on a daily basis is really effective, because when you switch into it, this focused recurring rhythm means that you don't have this, oh, where did I get to last week? I haven't touched this for 5 days. There was a weekend in between. And you know how sometimes you can be a bit slow on the uptake if you haven't got the high frequency of creative activity. Like, I think to me, to make crafting happen, it's like, even if I don't feel like it today, do it today anyway. Yeah. Keep the connection to the work high, so you're in the mind space. Otherwise, like, the critical thing for me is, if I'm not like, I really do try to write 3 articles a week. And I know that there's a rhythm to that, and that I need to work on that continuously. So if I don't feel like writing today, like a full article, I will then hunt around for, well, what's a topic list? Maybe I get 5 or 10 topics where I kind of only write the headline, and then I can come back to it the following day. I think the real problem here is if, when we're on a creative project and we allow too much time to dissipate between the activities, we're a bit dusty, We're like, where was I? So I like to get into like these rhythms of 3 times a week, twice a week, 4 times a week. This seems to be roughly my frequency for a creative effort. What about you? If you're going to get focused on something, let's say you're writing the Tales of Mark Pearson Freeland, like, what would be your focused effort? What would be your rhythm once you're at that shaping and crafting stage?
Look, I think by that time I've gone through the seeding spot, and I've got through that sort of experimentation moment into this new phase of crafting. I'd like to think that I have a little bit of a habit, but as we know, habits are only as good as when you can actually uphold it. And I think what we've heard from Doug, and by proxy, obviously Rick, today, is there's a fine balance between being super, super disciplined and focused, as well as having enough freedom around yourself. I'm reminded of Julia Cameron with journalation, having the morning pages, going out for a walk and so on, really specifying your own time and being quite strict with your own freedom, which sounds kind of counterintuitive. I need to be strict and disciplined around how much time I'm not working. Yeah. But I think actually that's one of the tricks, isn't it?
It is.
In order to maintaining a cadence with the work that you're doing.
Yeah. Because
what I've observed in the times when I haven't prioritized rest, The Artist's Way as well was another great book. I think that was Julia Smith. I think if I remember, I will have to get our listeners to go into the back catalogue, Mike, and find us.
That is the quiz question. Who wrote journalation and who wrote artist pages? I think Mark might be throwing you on a bit of a curveball. I think he may have mixed his authors there, but that we still love you all the same, Marky Mark. But here's the thing for you. Like, when you think about the patterns in both of those books, but also what we learn a lot from different superstars, is to prioritize first things first. Meaning, in my practice, I write a journal before I open my email in the morning, because I know as soon as I'm into email, I'll have got all of the European and American emails. I'll be off to the races, things to do. So I just know that I need to write that journal in the morning before I look at my email, before my first call. Now, in the case of today, I had to dictate my journal on the way to the cafe to get my coffee before my first call at 8 a.m. in the morning. Now, the point here is, I knew that if I didn't sneak in a quick dictated journal, that I was running the risk of not writing today. So I will even do this, Mark, to ensure that I write in the morning every day. If I'm really busy, if I've started a call, an early call, and realize I haven't written my journal, I will take a moment and write one word entry for the day. One word, as just about the focused effort and the continuous repeatable habit. Because as James Clear in Atomic Habits says, once you've skipped a habit for 2 days in a row, that is the new habit. It's gone.
That's it. They disappear like that, don't they? And I think you're right, Mike. In the tales of Mark Pearson Freeland, the way that I would do it is through that repeated effort, but with enough space around it to find that joy of life, and also not to let it become a difficulty. We heard you obviously referenced Einstein earlier. I'd say that another great creative genius would be Dyson, going through that volume of iteration as well as crafting and experimentation, similar to the process we're doing today.
Yes.
He was able to then create a product that did uphold his ultimate goal.
Yeah.
And I think that was just from repeated strain, to be honest, but also having the ability to rest, review, have a look at what worked, and then, like you said, be a magpie and take those good ideas on to the next thing.
What do you think, once we've got a regular habit going, let's just say we're writing your book and you said, I'm going to write just 1 page a day. That's it. And it's going to be like a 300-page book. So that'll get me done in a year. Going up this staircase, doing this shaping and the crafting, what do you think the greatest challenge after making sure you do it every day? What comes next as the challenge? What's the hard thing about completing this stage? What do you think is the real hard stuff?
One word: ego.
Ooh.
I think that is the blocker for a lot of the individuals that we've covered on the show. Particularly, Elizabeth Gilbert. I know we've referenced her a few times already today. She makes a big case for ego being the reason why people get blocked, or better said, why people don't release the work or even don't start the work that they're going to try and do.
So if I understand what you're saying, you're like, as I'm like getting into writing the book, I'm looking at my writing and being my own worst critic.
Yeah, I believe, going back to our series with Austin Kleon, he obviously had a great call out. Just start, give yourself time, permission to explore, see what happens. I think in addition to the work that he shared, as well as some of the other individuals from our creative series, you've also got to work on being comfortable with the job that you're doing and how it aligns to you as a person. I think ultimately the project, the product, or the book that maybe I'm writing is going to have to be something that I'm comfortable with releasing. I'm sure that there are authors or musicians out there that hate the work that they create.
Right.
I'm not sure who, but I'm sure it's much more difficult to do that. Instead, I feel as though it's worth more of your time to get comfortable with the idea, comfortable with you being the face, let's say, of that product or the facilitator of a workshop.
Yeah.
To then be the best version of you in that situation. If you're uncomfortable, I think other people are going to kind of see that. And instead, simultaneously, while working on the job, while keeping the habit of getting up every day and doing journal, if you're also working on yourself from a confidence or transparency perspective, I think that can only do good.
So it's interesting. The way I'm relating to this is that, I would really like to write a book. And I'm going to be very open in saying I don't think I'm like naturally talented writer. Like it doesn't come particularly easy, so I have to work really, really hard on it. It's a bit like, Goggins actually says that I'm not like a natural runner, which you find hard to believe given how much he runs and how good he is. But he just says he has to work harder. And I also, by the way, relate to that. I'm also not a natural runner, but I have to work on it. Anyway, but back to what I was going to say is that the way I have processed this in the crafting phase is that my goal, my intermediate goal for writing a book is just to write 3 posts a day on the blog for my company. And I know that I'm writing to and about and covering the subjects that will be in my book. So I'm going through almost a prototype of every page and every chapter of the book as little bite-sized posts. And honestly, I think I have another year and a half of blog writing before I get to the moment where I actually start on the book.
Yeah.
But somehow there was an unlock for me in remaining focused, because I'm literally covering a whole series of topics. And I'm quite comfortable and satisfied because I'm hitting 3 posts a week. And in a funny way, I can just enjoy that. And I can know that in 1.5 years from now, I'll be ready to write the book, and I'm in no hurry. So the changing of that goal was quite powerful for me to sustain the effort.
Yeah. And I think the key call out there, and even I've scribbled it down on my side, Mike, start today. You know, at the end of the day, these projects are the culmination of a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of discipline, and somewhat sacrifice in certain situations. And what you're doing is exactly that, early stages. You know, you're doing all the hard work, so then it becomes that little bit easier in the long run, doesn't it?
I think so. Like, I feel that having covered all those topics, what'll happen is when I do turn to the book, I'll have already kind of written the book in my head because I've done all these blog posts. So I'll be able to go, I don't really agree exactly with what I said a year ago. So that it gives me a more powerful point of view in the book rather than discovering it as I go through. I'm also playing with different writing styles, different formats and structures. So that to me is a great way to enjoy that crafting phase and not getting dispirited or bummed out, or just changing the goal so that you're not classic, don't want to get 6-pack abs in 30 days. I'll do it in 30 months.
Right? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's it. Wow. Some amazing stuff that we've already learned, Mike. I mean, I think if I'm putting a quick lid on it, we're kind of getting to that culmination stage now, aren't we?
I think we are. But, the great thing is Rick Rubin ain't done yet.
I know. If you can believe it, we still have yet another tip from Rick Rubin's 4 stages of the creative way. And this time, Mike, we're actually going to close out with Doug as well. He's going to reveal this final moment, this moment of perspective, this moment of finalization, and this moment where you can put the product out into the world ready for people to see.
Once we've done lots of crafting, we've worked our way up those 100 stories, then we get to the completion stage. As Rubin says, this is where we leave behind discovery and building. With a beautiful volume of material crafted before us, the final form is refined to be released into the world. So this stage is about refinement, and it's also about perspective. This is a stage at which Rubin encourages you to maybe start to show your work to a few different people, not necessarily to get their specific feedback and incorporate that feedback into the work. You can do that, but that perspective is more about viewing the work that you've spent your time individually. It's helpful to see your work through the eyes of someone else. And when you share it with someone, that kind of happens automatically. If you play the song for one person or a crowd, if you read your essay out loud to someone else, even without getting any feedback from those other people, you're still going to have a different perspective on the work because it's not just existing in your head. It lives in between you and the person that you're performing it for. And that will allow you to perhaps do a little bit of the final stages of refining as you recognize the things that work and don't quite work once you've got that audience there to change the perspective with which you're viewing the thing.
Yeah, so the one thing I would say here on what Rick is recommending, I would bring forward that feedback in the process. I don't know whether that's from the prototyping work we've done together, Mark. I quite like getting early stage feedback. I think maybe the care to take is don't, just because one person says I don't like it doesn't mean you stop. I think when you're refining your work, it's good that if it evokes a strong response, be it good, bad, or otherwise, strong response is good, right? But I don't think you want a sample size of one and like throw away all your work just because one person didn't jive with it, right?
Yeah, that's exactly it. If I'm going to show my partner or a colleague and they don't necessarily align with it, that's okay. Maybe it's not for them. Maybe it's a different demographic, different target audience.
Yeah.
Going back to Sarah Blakely selling fax machines, just because she wasn't a big fan of doing the job doesn't mean that it's not a great job for others. There's exactly total subjectivity in all of these things, isn't there?
Yeah.
And you're right. I do somewhat agree. I think my image of Rick is in his production studio, beavering away. He is the master, maybe the GOAT beneath Quincy Jones, as we were talking about prior to the show. But I think for a lot of us, seeking some feedback is going to be valuable and helpful, maybe earlier in the process, only because then you can get a sense of, is this what customers are looking for? Okay, well, no problem. Maybe we refine it, and to steal your word again, be a magpie and kind of take it over. And it kind of feels maybe more akin within the experimentation and the crafting phase, that moment of sharing with a customer, doesn't it?
Yes. And I think that refining and polishing something, I mean, I think the big thing in my mind there is, how do you know when you're done? Now, I think this is a really interesting question. So if you're writing, let's go back to your book, Mark. Okay, so you're writing the book. You're in the refining phase, but here's the question. How do you know when to stop refining and launch your book?
Well, I suspect it is helpful to have a deadline in mind. I think given time, we all can delay and want to delay the final deliverable of anything that we're working on. I'm sure when asked, a lot of people would say, no, a little bit more time for that project. A little bit more time would make it better. And the truth is, having a deadline is actually incredibly helpful, because then it provides that focused effort that we were hearing from Rick earlier in today's show. So in answer to your question, and where I'm sort of rounding up here, is I think the project or the product is nearly done because you're reaching that final moment when you said it was going to be done. Otherwise, at least for me, Mike, maybe others are different, but I think I would continually look to extend it just a little bit more to get maybe a little bit more value out of it, maybe push it a little bit further. What about you? When do you know when things are ready?
Look, I think put everything aside. If the main feature of a product can generate a wow from a tester, a genuine, oh, wow, that's pretty good. And it's not induced, it's not coerced, it's just, wow, that's pretty good. Regardless of how much else is rough and ready and not complete, if there's some wow in it, some strong, oh, that's neat. Even if it's missing some pages and functions and features, but there's some wow in it. I think when that's like missing wow, and it's just like, oh, I guess that would be good when that bit works. Like that's a telltale that it's not ready, right?
Yeah.
But if your killer app, your key feature has the power to genuinely wow someone in testing, then I'm like, ship that. Let's get it going, right? Because the wow is what you're truly looking forward to. If it is wow, but in the case of your book, the cover design's really dodgy, or some of the reference and citation is not there, dude, like, let's go, let's get that. Because if people are like, oh, wow, this is really good, then like get it out there. I think there's too many products that go out that have literally zero wow, that don't do their core job well, whether it's to inspire, to inform, entertain. They just don't do it. If you've got genuine wow, and I would say you test it with someone you don't know, and they're like, genuine, unprompted, unaided wow, or the equivalent thereof, man, get that thing out there. Stop refining, Mark. Launch. Publish.
Go. Yeah, that's it. Well, like Rick was saying, you've got to work not rushed, but focused. Get that completed fast and keep that momentum going. So I think you're right, Mike. You and Rick, you'd probably have a lot of time on your hands to talk about music as well as getting things out the door.
Yes. Yeah, he's a cool cat. Imagine how great that would be to meet him. Now, you've met him on this show. You've studied his work. What is your homework assignment, Mark?
Well, I think, Mike, maybe coming into that final piece, where we were touching upon how to know when things are ready. I think that's probably revealed to me straight away that I have a tendency to maybe leave it for a little bit longer. I think I need to work on figuring out exactly when a project or a product is about to be done and when it's injecting that wow. That's the work I'm gonna do. Review some of the projects and see what's sitting on the red light, on the medium colored light. What about you, Mike? After a day of Rick Rubin deep diving, what's standing out to you?
So somewhat step 2 of his process with the experimentation, I think I could let things go their natural path for longer. I can be a bit of a rusher when I think I got it. I can be a bit of a rush. So yeah, like experimenting a bit more and creating time for it as well. I just don't think I create enough time for it,
Well, yeah, time is going back to one of your questions earlier. What's the thing that blocks people doing it? It's either ego or time.
Yeah. And if you don't control and manage your own time, the truth really is nobody else will.
Nope.
Nobody else will. Well, Mark, I want to say a big thank you to you. Great clips. What a great creative opener for another creativity series. Wow. Get ready, everybody. Here on show 263 with Rick Rubin and the Creative Act. I want to thank you, our members, listeners, and viewers for joining us on what was not only a 4-part action-packed way of being creative, but it all started with getting all in. And then when you come out, just hold things lightly. Don't let them bog you down. And there was 4 steps: seed, experiment, craft, and completion. Do those things and you will let things grow and incubate in your creative being. You'll be able to put things out into the world that truly are the best version of yourself, which is exactly what we're all about here on the Moonshots podcast. That's a wrap.